Release VX 2.8 continues to make a designer more productive with new technology. In this video, we will be highlighting enhanced teardrop functionality, new multi-hole pad stacks and vias, and an update to the selection list capability. To start, let's look at some of the new teardrop functionality. To set up teardrops, we go to the route menu, trace in teardrops. This is now a dockable panel within the workspace. Note that the teardrop engine has been updated, so when placing curved teardrops, the process will be exponentially faster. There's two modes in which teardrops can be added. You can do it dynamically by enabled dynamic generation, or you can do by various selection options. As such, because there are two different modes, there are two different setup sections. There's a setup that you can have for dynamic teardrop creation, and then there's a setup that you can have for manual teardrop creation for both T-junctions and basic teardrops. So with the selection control, I'm doing selection by object. I can group select a set of items. And then with them selected, I can click on generate. It'll generate those teardrops based on what we've defined in our manual teardrop section. Let's go ahead and undo that, and we'll bounce over to the curved teardrops, where again we can set up what the radius of those curves will be, and we can choose what objects they're going to be applied to. So again, if we group select these items and hit generate, you'll see very quickly it adds curved teardrops to all of our vias and our T-junction trace section. Just real quick, if we leave the dynamic turned on, notice that as I move this trace segment, it will dynamically update the teardrop for our T-junction. All right, let's move on to custom via pads and multi-hole capability within the library. So if we open up our library manager, we will go to pad stacks, defaults. In this case, I'm going to work with vias. I've already made one in this case, so if we go ahead and choose edit, we'll review how this was made. So what we do is, if we want to make a new one, we would just choose new. For this via, what I've done is I've created basically a 2 through feed via that I'm going to use in my design. And to do that, I've used an oblong pin. If we don't have an oblong pin of the proper size, obviously we would just go to the pads tab. I could create oblong, and I could make a new pad stack appropriate for my via. If I don't have the appropriate hole size needed for this via that we're creating, we could also define a new round hole. Going back to our pad stack tab, I would then select the appropriate pad shape for the mounted opposite side and internal. By default, this would be set to single hole, but since we're doing a multi-hole via, I would choose the multi-hole button, and then I hit assign. From there, I choose the hole size that I'm going to use. In this case, I've chosen 10, and then I would define how many rows and columns that I'm going to create. In this case here, I've done 1 row and 2 columns, and then I specified what the spacing was between these. So, but for the columns, I would care about the spacing between those. In this case here, I've chosen 10. When I do populate, it's going to tell me that it's going to update the offsets that are already there. I hit yes, and you'll see that it sets from the center of the pin. It's going to move each one of those holes centers over 10 mils each direction. Click OK, and then with our view here, we can see what our via looks like with an oblong pad and our 2 holes. Now you do have the capability of obviously creating, I could use a rectangle pin, a square pin, I could put 4 holes in it. There's no limitation to what you could create here. Once we're done with that, we'll go ahead and save, exit out of there. We now can go back to our design. We need to make sure that in our setup parameters for our design that we have allowed this new via type. In this case here, I have selected it and checked it as an allowed via for through-hole options. Let's scroll out and we'll go down to a power section. These types of vias will not be needed for every type of design, but as you'll be able to see here, it will make designing something where you need a low inductance path into a ground plane, or special design requirements based on some of the new components that are now available today. So basically what we can do is we can start routing this location, and then I can do a right click and I can choose our new via type. If I double click, you will see it will add our new via type. I can continue routing off of that, or in this case I'll just hit escape because that's all I want. You can see I have my auto teardrop still turned on. So again, with a matter of a couple clicks, I've added a nice low inductance feed into the ground plane for this capacitor, and with our curved teardropping turned on, it's filling in the copper for us, so we don't even have to add extra trace or copper to this via type. We do have the capability of rotating this via, so I could pull this out a little further. I can do a right click, rotate via 45 degrees if I wanted to do that for some reason. Just gives you extra flexibility in your design. All right, lastly, let's move over to filter selection. Let's scroll up here to where we've done this teardrop stuff actually. If I group select over all these items, and let's say I wanted to change the trace width on these, or just get rid of teardrop information, or just get rid of the vias, it'd be much more difficult to try and pick each one of the vias off, or have to worry about going in and resetting our filter to select those items. So instead I can group select all of this, and with our selection list I can find all of those vias and select just those. Now previously you'd have to scroll through the list, find them, select them, but now I can do enable filter, and then I can say, okay, for this column I want to just see my vias. And then with the vias just on, I can say apply that selection, and then I could go in, it will highlight all of those, and then I can delete those. So you can see with a couple clicks of a mouse button, I can select a specific item from a group without having to worry about going in and resetting up my filters and changing them back and forth again by just using the selection list and the filter function.